Hello dear friends, how is it going? I'm Ari Thurger and today I'm going to give you a very brief take on Thor's hammer as an element of religious syncretism. This is a subject I would like to develop in more depth on a future video, but for now I'll give you some basic notions and hopefully food for thought. But in the future I shall give proper sources and a more thorough investigation concerning this religious phenomenon of the Scandinavian late Iron Age. Anyway, let's do this in one take, or try to, and go straight to the point. Let's start with a quick view, shall we? Please. Depictions of Thor's hammer in material culture date back to the late Viking Age, usually in pendants and runestones depicting figurations of the hammer, iconography. The meanings can be quite broad, but in particular they were related to transitional rituals and magical symbolism. Its use as a personal adornment was an identity response to the expansion of Christianity, not as a provocation or to engage in conflict, but the appreciation of the habit Christians had of wearing crosses started the habit of using Thor's hammers as pendants and in or as other personal adornments to express the identity of the deity and show that Thor also had a representation. This is when we start to see Thor's hammers with elaborate decorations. Most Thor's hammer pendants were worn during the 10th and the 11th centuries of the Common Era, obviously, therefore directly related to the Christianization of Scandinavia, leading to molds to cast both Thor's hammers and Christian crosses, as seen in this fine example I will show you here on the screen. But the new religion also adopted a pagan symbol, that's right, with representations of the hammer being found in Scandinavian baptismal fonts from the 11th and the 12th centuries in order to scare away demons. The symbol, the Thor's hammer, denoted power for both pagans and Christians. However, it's important to say that there are representations of hammers before Christianization and before elaborate Thor's hammer as pendants or to be worn as a personal adornment. Just as the image shows from Birka, Sweden, the so-called Thor's hammer rings, which already emerged in the 9th century and differ considerably from the usual Thor's hammer pendants. Instead of a single pendant, they have many small miniature of hammers and the rings attached to a large iron ring, and possibly axes as well. In the 9th century in England there are also findings of Thor's hammers. Further south in the Old Saxon and Frisian context, it seems there was also the custom of wearing Thor's hammers, or just hammers. The fabrication of hammers, not as pendants, seems to come from a much earlier period, perhaps as early as the 7th century in continental contexts, although those examples don't give us many indications that they were ever related to a deity or specifically to Thor, or Donar, or Thunur, and they are only labeled Thor's hammers by modern archaeologists and historians for a better understanding in archaeological studies. Their shape has certainly influenced the creation later on of Thor's hammers in Scandinavia in the 10th and the 11th centuries as jewelry for personal adornment. Amulets, such as Thor's hammer, are found in archaeological excavations throughout the north, although not in large numbers as we might have expected, since Thor was the most popular deity in Northern Europe, at least from the end of the Scandinavian Iron Age and the early Middle Ages, Nordic Middle Ages. As stated previously, this is a late phenomenon which arises in response to the Christian cross. Actually, as many academics, many scholars have argued, the physical representation of these hammers of Thor as amulets or as pendants depart from the inversion of the Christian cross. Some of these hammers are indistinguishable from Christian crosses and can play both roles in the religious syncretism phase that preceded Christianization. Again, a mold was found in Norway that could be used to forge a cross, and the hammer at the same time, indicating that the two symbols coexisted peacefully at a time when Christianity was on the rise. Depictions of Thor's hammer really only appear during the ascension of Christianization. This religious syncretism isn't solely found in material culture, although material culture does give us more and better and concrete evidences of this syncretic religious and cultural phenomenon between the Scandinavian heathenism and Christianity. But I would like to give you an example from the literature, from the literary sources as well, an example which I find pretty interesting that shows a closer and more human behavior as a response to this religious syncretism, something more animated, more dynamic, if you take my meaning, instead of just being material culture, which is often static and doesn't really give us that living description and action from the part of a human being, a real human person. Well, in Landnámabók, a medieval Icelandic written work which describes in detail the settlement and colonization of Iceland by the Norse in the 9th and 10th centuries of the Common Era, we find a character in it, a real-life person actually, named Helgi, of whom it is said to be a Christian, except for matters such as sea voyages, for which he prefers to invoke, pray to, rely on, or trust in Thor. Although in this, as in many other cases, it is unclear how one trusted a god, pagan or Christian. However, this source shows religious syncretism, and as Thor was still very popular, he would still be a deity whom some Icelanders still trusted for certain matters and moments of life. Although in Iceland, during this period of this account, Christianity was already well rooted, and many Icelanders were Christians, or like Helgi, would have a flexibility in religious belief between pagan and Christian, and would of course turn to Christ and the Christian God for certain matters, and for other matters turn to the older gods. An attitude we see precisely in the previously shown mold for making silver pendants, both crucifixes and mjolnir, Thor's hammer. The mold could be used for making either, depending on the customer. Producing both a Christian crucifix and the hammer of Thor for customers who either still believed in the Norse gods and Norse mythology and those belief systems, or had this same religious flexibility just like Helgi and were heathen and Christian both at once. Alright, my dear friends, I hope this brief introduction to Thor's hammer as a symbol of religious syncretism was useful. Later on, only the gods know when, I shall produce a video about this subject with more details and other sources. Thank you so much for watching, see you on the next video, and as always, tack för idag. Thanks for today. Obrigado por hoje. Farewell.